1. The Whispering Shadows of Greywood House. There's an old house deep in the rural backroads of Tennessee, hidden away from prying eyes. Locals call it Greywood House, a once grand mansion now decaying under the weight of neglect. In 1987, the Merrick family bought it for an impossibly low price, eager to escape the chaos of city life. They thought it was a fresh start, but the house had other plans. On the first night, the youngest daughter, Emily, woke to the sound of whispering. It was soft at first, like a faint breeze, but it grew louder as if invisible mouths were just inches from her ears. She screamed, claiming she could see shadows dancing on her walls, swirling around like smoke. Her parents dismissed it as a bad dream. The next night, Emily's older brother, Jake, heard it too. The whispers came from the attic. He swore he saw someone up there, a tall figure with glowing eyes. His parents climbed up to the attic with him, only to find it empty. But Jake was pale, shaking, convinced that whatever was in the house wanted them gone. Weeks passed, and the whispering became a constant presence, following the Merricks from room to room. Things escalated when the walls began to bleed. At first, it was just a drip here or there, thick, red droplets seeping from the ceiling corners, but then entire walls were streaked with the substance. The final straw came when the father, Mr. Merrick, woke up one night with claw marks running down his back. The family fled Greywood House, leaving everything behind. To this day, no one stays in the house for more than a few days. The locals say the spirits of the house are angry because it was built on cursed land, a place where, centuries ago, innocent people were slaughtered in a brutal massacre. 2. The Wraith of the Pine Barrens. Deep within the tangled woods of New Jersey's Pine Barrens, there's a stretch of land where the trees seem twisted, their bark blackened as though burned by fire. For decades, hunters and hikers have whispered about a creature known as the Wraith, a figure of darkness that appears only at night. Those who claim to have seen it are rarely believed, but the stories keep coming. In 2011, a group of friends went camping near a small clearing in the Barrens. They'd heard the rumors but laughed them off. On their second night, something strange happened. A thick fog rolled in, swallowing the clearing, turning the air cold and damp. The friends huddled around the fire, trying to keep warm, when they heard it, the sound of footsteps in the distance. Slow, deliberate, circling their campsite. One of them, Mark, shone a flashlight into the fog, and there it was, a figure, tall and thin, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. It wore what looked like an old cloak, torn and ragged. Its face, or what passed for one, was hidden in shadows, but they could feel its eyes watching them. Then it spoke, a raspy voice that sent chills down their spines. "Leave this place before you join the others." They ran. They didn't stop running until they reached their car. But something followed them. As they drove out of the Barrens, Mark looked in the rearview mirror and saw the Wraith standing in the road, watching them. Years later, another group of campers went missing in the same area, their tents found slashed apart, but there was no sign of the campers. Some say the Wraith took them, adding to its collection of souls lost in the Barrens. 3. The Ghost of the Manor Bridge. There's a bridge in a small village in England, hidden away among the rolling hills, where locals refuse to cross after dark. It's said that at night, the spirit of a woman wanders the bridge, searching for her lost child. Her name was Eliza, and over a century ago, she lived in a grand manor not far from the village. One stormy night, her child wandered too close to the river that ran beneath the bridge and was swept away by the fast-moving current. Eliza searched for days but never found her child's body. In her grief, she threw herself from the bridge into the waters below. The villagers found her lifeless body the next morning, her face twisted in sorrow. Since then, people have reported seeing her ghost on the bridge, especially on stormy nights. She appears suddenly, dressed in a long white gown, her hair wet and matted. She walks slowly, calling out for her child, and sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, she'll ask you for help. The stories say that if you stop to speak with her, she'll take your hand, and if you let her, she'll drag you down into the river to join her in the afterlife. In 1998, two teenagers dared each other to go to the bridge at midnight. They laughed at the warnings, convinced the legend was just a silly ghost story. But when they didn't come home the next morning, a search party was sent out. They were found near the bridge, their faces pale, their clothes soaked through, as if they'd been standing in the rain for hours. The only thing they said before they were taken to the hospital was, "She's real." 4. The Possessed Doll of Salem. In the heart of Salem, Massachusetts, a town famous for its witch trials, there's a small antique shop filled with oddities from centuries past. Among the collection is an old porcelain doll dressed in a faded lace gown. The doll's eyes are particularly unsettling, a bright, unnatural blue that seems to follow you around the room. The shop owner, Mr. Calvin, had always been upfront about the doll's history. It had once belonged to a little girl named Annabelle, who died tragically in 1889. After her death, the doll was passed down through the generations of her family, each owner experiencing strange occurrences, doors opening on their own, objects moving without explanation, and the soft sound of a child's laughter echoing in the night. In 2005, a couple bought the doll as a curiosity. They were skeptical of the paranormal, but after taking the doll home, they quickly changed their minds. That first night, the couple was awoken by the sound of something scraping across the hardwood floor. The doll had moved from its place on the shelf to the foot of their bed. The husband, Tom, put it back, but the next morning, they found the doll in their kitchen, its head turned to face the door, as if waiting for someone. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Tom began having vivid nightmares of a little girl standing at the foot of his bed, her eyes glowing blue. His wife, Sarah, swore she'd heard the doll whispering in the dead of night. They tried to get rid of it, but every time they did, it somehow found its way back into their home. Desperate, they returned the doll to Mr. Calvin, who locked it away in the back of his shop. It remains there to this day, but even he refuses to go near it after dark. 5. The Faceless Woman of Whitefall Cemetery. Whitefall Cemetery is tucked away behind a dense forest in the outskirts of a quiet, almost forgotten town in Maine. It's an old burial ground, overgrown with ivy, the gravestones worn smooth by time. The locals avoid it, especially at dusk, because of one figure who is said to roam between the graves, the Faceless Woman. It started in the 1960s when a group of teenagers went to the cemetery for a dare. They were supposed to stay until midnight, but around 11:30 p.m., one of the boys, Dave, caught sight of something moving in the distance. A woman, dressed in a long flowing gown, was gliding between the gravestones. At first, they thought it might have been a mourner, but something about her wasn't right. Her movements were unnatural, too smooth, too silent. One of the girls, Anna, called out to the woman. The figure stopped. Slowly, she turned toward them, and that's when they saw it. She had no face. Just smooth, pale skin stretched where her eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. The group screamed and ran, stumbling through the thick trees until they found their way back to town. But Dave, he never made it out. His body was found a few days later, deep in the woods near the cemetery, his face drained of all color. There were no signs of trauma, but his expression was twisted in pure terror, his eyes wide open as though he had seen something no one should ever see. Since then, people claim that anyone who sees the faceless woman and dares to approach her doesn't survive the encounter. The last person to go missing was in 2017. A local man who wandered into the cemetery at night to investigate the legend. His body was found slumped against a tree near the cemetery's edge, his face frozen in a ghastly scream. 6. The Midnight Knocks. In 1993, a man named Carl Sanders moved into an old, creaky house on the outskirts of a small Pennsylvania town. It was a fixer-upper, but Carl liked the isolation, the quiet. However, the quiet didn't last long. A week after moving in, he started hearing knocking on his front door. At first, he dismissed it as the house settling or the wind, but the knocking continued, always at midnight. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. When he opened the door, no one was there. This went on for nights. Each time Carl opened the door to find the empty porch, his unease grew. He installed security cameras, hoping to catch a prankster in the act. But when he reviewed the footage, his blood ran cold. The camera captured the sound of the knocking, but there was no one on the porch, no sign of movement, not even the rustle of leaves. One night, after a particularly loud series of knocks, Carl decided to leave the door shut. He stayed up, sitting in his chair, gripping a baseball bat, waiting for whatever was outside to give up and leave. But this time, the knocks didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent. Then a voice, a raspy whisper, came through the door. "Let me in." Carl stood frozen, every hair on his body standing on end. He didn't move, didn't breathe, until the knocking finally stopped. The next morning, he found something strange. 3 long, deep scratches carved into the wood of his front door. He moved out shortly after, refusing to stay another night. The new owners, they experienced the same midnight knocks. The house still stands, empty now, but neighbors sometimes report hearing knocking on their doors late at night, and every time, no one is there. 7. The mirror in room 312. The Redstone Hotel, a once grand and luxurious establishment, now sits as a half-abandoned relic of its former glory. In the 1950s, it was known for hosting the rich and famous, but today, it's better known for its resident ghost in room 312. In 1961, a young woman named Margaret stayed in the hotel while visiting relatives. She checked into room 312, and the staff remembered her as quiet and polite, though she seemed a bit distant, as if something was weighing heavily on her mind. On the 3rd night of her stay, the guests in the rooms next to hers reported hearing a loud crash, followed by frantic sobbing coming from her room. When the staff entered the room the next morning, they found Margaret lying on the floor, her body twisted unnaturally, her eyes wide open in shock. The mirror in the room had shattered, but what disturbed them most was what they found written on the wall, smeared in what appeared to be lipstick. "She's in the mirror." After that, room 312 gained a reputation. Guests who stayed there complained of strange things happening. The mirror on the wall would fog up as if someone had breathed on it. Some reported seeing a pale figure standing behind them in the reflection, only to turn around and find the room empty. Others said they could hear faint whispers coming from the mirror itself. One man who stayed there in the late 80s even claimed that, as he was brushing his teeth, the reflection in the mirror smiled at him, though he wasn't smiling. He fled the hotel that night and never returned. The hotel has since closed off room 312 to guests, but staff still report hearing strange noises coming from inside, and sometimes, if you pass by the door at night, you can hear soft sobbing echoing through the hall. 8. The screams in the forest. There's a forest in northern Washington state, thick with towering trees and dense brush, where no one dares to venture after sunset. It's known as Blackthorn Woods, and it has a reputation for being a place where people disappear. In 2004, a park ranger named Julie was doing a routine patrol when she heard something strange, screams echoing through the trees. At first, she thought it might be an injured hiker, but as she moved deeper into the woods, the screams grew more unsettling. They didn't sound like they were coming from just one person. It was as if multiple voices were crying out at once, overlapping and blending into a cacophony of terror. Julie called for backup and continued her search, but no matter how far she walked, the screams always seemed to be just out of reach. Finally, after hours of searching, she found herself standing in front of an old crumbling cabin hidden deep in the woods. The door was ajar, and the screams were louder than ever. Against her better judgment, Julie stepped inside. The air inside the cabin was freezing, her breath coming out in thick puffs, but there was no one there. The screams, however, continued, louder and more desperate. She backed out of the cabin, her heart racing, and the moment she stepped outside, the screams stopped. The woods fell silent. She ran back to her truck and reported the incident, but when the rest of the rangers arrived to investigate, they found nothing, no cabin, no screams, nothing. Julie quit her job a week later, refusing to ever step foot in Blackthorn Woods again. 9. The haunting of Blackwood Asylum. Blackwood Asylum stood on a lonely hill, isolated from the world, its patients lost to time. It was built in the late 1800s, a grim institution for those society had deemed beyond help. Tales of inhumane treatments and brutal experimentation filled its history. By the 1950s, the asylum was shut down, but locals say it never truly closed. In 1999, a group of urban explorers decided to venture inside the decaying building. They had heard the stories, the strange lights, the sounds of distant screams echoing through the night, but they didn't believe them. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they broke in just after dusk, their footsteps disturbing the thick layer of dust that covered the floors. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with an unshakable sense of dread. Rooms were filled with rusted beds, old medical equipment, and peeling wallpaper. As they ventured deeper, they began hearing soft whispers, voices just on the edge of perception. At first, they thought it was the wind, but then they started hearing the sound of dragging footsteps. They stopped, holding their breath, and listened. The footsteps grew louder, as though something was slowly approaching. One of the explorers, Sam, shined his flashlight down the hallway, and in the beam of light, a figure appeared. It was a woman, her hospital gown dirty and torn, her hair matted and wild. She moved with a slow, unnatural gait, her eyes wide and empty. She raised a finger to her lips, signaling them to be quiet. Panic gripped the group, and they turned to run, but the doors slammed shut behind them. The lights flickered, and the air filled with the distant, anguished screams of patients long gone. The group scattered, frantically searching for a way out, but the asylum seemed to warp around them, hallways stretching endlessly. Sam was the first to go missing, his terrified scream cut off abruptly. It took hours before the rest of the group found their way out, though they were never the same. Sam's body was never recovered, but sometimes, on dark nights, people passing by the old asylum say they can see him in the window, staring out with hollow, empty eyes. 10. The Shadow Man of Morgan Hill. Morgan Hill is a quiet town, one of those places where everyone knows each other. But there's something else in Morgan Hill, something not quite human, something that people only talk about in whispers, the Shadow Man. In 2003, a family moved into a small house at the edge of town, excited for a fresh start. It was a charming old home, but strange things started happening almost immediately. It began with the children, who complained about a man standing in their rooms at night, watching them. At first, their parents dismissed it as nightmares, but soon, the whole family began seeing him. He was always there, standing in the corner of a room, his form a black silhouette, tall, impossibly thin, with long limbs that seemed to stretch into unnatural angles. He had no features, just a void where a face should be, yet his presence felt malevolent. The family would wake up in the middle of the night to find him standing at the foot of their bed, silent and still. Sometimes they would hear a soft rasping noise, like heavy breathing, though his chest never rose or fell. They tried to get rid of him. They moved out, thinking it was the house that was haunted, but the Shadow Man followed. No matter where they went, he was always there, lurking in the periphery, watching, waiting. Desperate, they sought the help of a local priest who came to bless the house. The priest left in a hurry, pale and shaken, muttering about something wrong with the family. He refused to return. The sightings became more frequent, the atmosphere in the house growing oppressive. The family couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, constantly on edge, knowing that at any moment the Shadow Man would appear. In 2006, they moved again, this time to another state, but the Shadow Man followed. He always does. 11. The Phantom Handprints of Street Mary's Church. Street Mary's Church in the small village of Dover, England, has stood for over 700 years. It's a peaceful, quiet place by day, but by night, strange things happen. Parishioners claim that the church is haunted by something far more sinister than the spirits of the departed. It began in 1975 when a group of teenagers broke into the church late at night on a dare. They laughed and joked, taking turns trying to spook one another. But as they sat in the pews, the temperature in the church dropped suddenly. They could see their breath in the freezing air, though it was midsummer. One of the girls, Lisa, felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She turned, expecting one of her friends, but no one was behind her. They decided to leave, but when they got to the doors, they wouldn't open. The stained glass windows began to rattle, and the sound of faint, childlike laughter filled the air. Panic set in as they struggled to pry the doors open. One of the boys, Matt, grabbed the handle, and when he pulled his hand away, there were small handprints pressed into the skin of his arm, as if a child had gripped him tightly. The handprints stayed there for days, no matter how much he washed or scrubbed. Matt had nightmares of tiny hands reaching for him, grabbing at his throat, pulling him down into the earth. Years later, the church remains active, but no one dares stay inside after dark. Visitors claim to see child-sized handprints appearing on the pews, the walls, even the windows. And those who do stay late? Well, they say that sometimes they can still hear the faint laughter of children, though none have been there for centuries. 12. The Screaming Well. In a remote village in Romania, there's an old, dried-up well that the locals avoid at all costs. It's called the Screaming Well, and it's said that anyone who listens too closely will hear the voices of the damned echoing from its depths. The well has been there for as long as anyone can remember, but it's cursed. Legend has it that during a brutal winter in the 1600s, a group of villagers threw a woman accused of witchcraft into the well. She cursed them with her final breath, vowing that they would hear her voice for eternity, calling from the darkness below. In 1982, a group of tourists came to the village, unaware of the well's dark history. They were curious about the legend and wanted to see the well for themselves. The villagers warned them not to go near it, but they didn't listen. One of them, a man named Alex, leaned over the edge, peering into the black abyss. At first, there was nothing but silence, but as the wind picked up, they heard it, a faint, mournful wail, rising from the depths of the well. It grew louder and louder until it became a piercing scream, filled with rage and sorrow. The group tried to pull Alex back, but it was too late. His eyes glazed over, and he leaned further in, as if entranced by the sound. Suddenly, he collapsed, screaming and clawing at his ears. When they finally dragged him away from the well, his eyes were wide with terror, his face pale as death. He refused to speak about what he had heard, but he was never the same. Alex was institutionalized soon after, plagued by hallucinations of screaming faces and a woman's voice calling his name from the darkness. To this day, no one approaches the well, and on windy nights, the villagers say you can still hear the screams of the cursed woman echoing across the fields. 13. The Watcher in the Window. In 2016, a young couple, Ben and Alyssa, bought an old farmhouse in the quiet countryside of Iowa. It was a fixer-upper, but the sprawling fields and the isolation promised them peace. From the moment they moved in, though, something felt off. Alyssa couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, especially from the upstairs windows, which seemed to overlook everything on the property. One night, while Ben was working late, Alyssa heard soft footsteps above her. At first, she thought it was just the creaking of the old house, but the footsteps were too deliberate, soft but unmistakable, moving across the floor of the upstairs bedroom. She called Ben, asking him to hurry home, but when he arrived, they found nothing. A few nights later, as they lay in bed, Ben woke up suddenly. His heart raced as he realized someone was standing at the foot of the bed, silhouetted by the moonlight streaming through the window. The figure didn't move, but Ben could feel its eyes on him. He reached out to turn on the lamp, but by the time the room filled with light, the figure was gone. Alyssa had seen nothing. After that, strange things began to happen more frequently. They would come home to find the upstairs windows open, though they always locked them. At night, they could hear the soft tread of footsteps circling the house, and sometimes they caught a glimpse of movement in the windows, a shadowy figure watching them from the upper floor. Finally, they installed cameras around the house, hoping to catch the intruder. One night, they heard the sound of shuffling footsteps again and ran to check the footage. What they saw chilled them to the bone. On the camera facing the front yard, a figure stood perfectly still in the upstairs window, watching them. But the footage also revealed something even more disturbing. No one had entered or left the house. The figure had appeared out of nowhere, and when they ran upstairs to confront it, the room was empty. They moved out shortly after, leaving the house behind. But sometimes at night, when they pass by that old farmhouse on their drives, they swear they can still see the figure in the window, watching, waiting. 14. The Crying Woman of Greystone Hollow. Greystone Hollow, an abandoned village nestled in the remote forests of West Virginia, was once a thriving mining town. But in the early 1900s, a series of cave-ins at the mine led to the deaths of dozens of men, and the village was eventually abandoned. However, locals still talk about the Crying Woman, said to be the grieving widow of one of the miners who never left. In 1977, a group of campers stumbled upon the forgotten village while hiking through the woods. They decided to set up camp among the crumbling stone ruins, thinking it would be a fun adventure. That night, just after midnight, they heard it, a soft, mournful sobbing, echoing through the hollow. At first, they thought it was an animal, but the sound was unmistakably human, the kind of deep sorrow that pierces the soul. One of the campers, Erin, wandered off toward the sound, her curiosity getting the better of her. The others followed, but as they approached the old church at the edge of the village, the sobbing grew louder. Erin called out, asking if someone needed help, but there was no answer, just the sound of crying, filling the air with sadness. Suddenly, they saw her. Standing in the doorway of the old church was a woman dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothes. Her long, dark hair obscured her face, but her shoulders shook with the force of her sobs. Erin took a step toward her, but the woman turned and fled into the darkness of the church. Without thinking, Erin followed. Inside the church, the air was cold, unnaturally so. The crying stopped abruptly, and the woman was nowhere to be seen. The other campers rushed in, but Erin was frozen, staring at the back wall of the church, her face pale as death. There on the old stone wall, they saw it, handprints, smeared in blood, trailing up toward the ceiling. They ran from the church, abandoning their campsite, and didn't stop until they were miles away. Erin never spoke of what she saw inside that church, but her friends noticed a change in her after that night. She became distant, withdrawn, and her eyes always seemed to linger on the shadows, as though she was waiting for something to emerge. The crying woman is still said to roam Greystone Hollow, her sobs echoing through the night, mourning her lost love. But those who hear her cries beware. She has been known to lure the curious into the darkness, and not all of them return. 15. The possession of Hannah Talbot. In 2008, the small town of Salem, Indiana, was rocked by the terrifying case of Hannah Talbot, a seemingly ordinary high school student who became the subject of a horrifying possession. It started innocently enough. Hannah, a quiet, studious girl, began experiencing strange mood swings and intense nightmares. Soon, her friends noticed she was withdrawing from social activities, spending more time alone. She became erratic, losing weight and complaining about a constant presence that watched her. Her parents took her to doctors, but no one could explain what was happening to her. Things escalated one night when Hannah's mother found her daughter sitting on her bed, speaking in a deep, guttural voice that wasn't her own. The language she spoke was unknown, and her eyes had turned a pale, milky white. Terrified, her parents contacted the local church, convinced that something far more sinister than illness was at work. Father Jacobs, a priest with experience in exorcisms, was brought in. When he arrived, Hannah was restrained to her bed, her body contorting unnaturally, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. The priest attempted to speak to her, but the voice that responded was not Hannah's. It laughed, mocking him, taunting him with details of his own past, secrets only he could know. As the exorcism began, the room grew icy cold, and the lights flickered. Hannah screamed, her body writhing violently against her restraints. Her skin rippled as though something was crawling beneath it. Father Jacobs recited prayers, sprinkling holy water as Hannah's voice shifted between her own and the dark entity that had taken over her. At one point, her body levitated a few inches off the bed, the tension in the air so thick it was suffocating. After hours of struggle, the entity finally let out a blood-curdling scream and released its hold on her. Hannah collapsed, exhausted but free. The ordeal left her weak for months, and though she eventually recovered, she never fully spoke about what had happened during those lost weeks of her life. Father Jacobs, however, told a chilling story. During the exorcism, the entity had whispered to him, "I'm not gone. I'm waiting." He left the priesthood shortly after, haunted by the experience. 16. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Route 22. Route 22 in Pennsylvania is a long, winding road that cuts through miles of farmland and forest. It's often lonely, desolate, and at night, it's known for something far more sinister, a phantom hitchhiker that appears to travelers when they're most vulnerable. In 1994, a truck driver named Joe was making his way through the dark stretch of Route 22, heading home after a long haul. It was nearly 2 a.m., and fog had settled thickly over the road, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. As he approached a bend, his headlights caught sight of a woman standing by the side of the road. She was young, dressed in a white gown, her face pale and hollow-eyed. She raised her hand, signaling for a ride. Joe pulled over, concerned that she might be in danger. When she climbed into the truck, she said very little, only thanking him in a soft, distant voice. As they drove, Joe tried to make small talk, but she barely responded, staring straight ahead, her eyes distant. When they approached a crossroads, the woman turned to him and whispered, "This is where I died." Before Joe could react, she vanished, completely disappeared from the passenger seat. He swerved, nearly driving off the road, his heart racing as he tried to process what had just happened. When he stopped at the next town, shaken, he recounted the story to the locals. They told him that years ago, a woman had been killed in a car accident near that very crossroads. Since then, many drivers have reported picking up a hitchhiker matching her description, only for her to vanish once they passed the spot where she lost her life. The phantom hitchhiker continues to appear on Route 22, sometimes standing by the roadside, sometimes riding in the back seat of unsuspecting travelers' cars. She never speaks of her past, except for that one chilling phrase, "This is where I died." The Forgotten House on Maple Street. Introduction. Maple Street was a quiet, unassuming lane nestled in a small New England town. Its charm lay in its simplicity, neat rows of Victorian houses, well-tended gardens, and the occasional cat stretching out on a sun-drenched porch. But behind one of the old, ivy-clad homes stood a house that time seemed to have forgotten. The house at 72 Maple Street had been empty for decades, and its reputation had become the stuff of local legend. The legend. Long ago, before the house was abandoned, it was owned by the Whittaker family. They were well respected in the community, known for their generosity and involvement in town affairs. But then, on a bitterly cold winter's night, the Whittakers vanished without a trace. The local police investigated, but no clues were found, and no sign of the family ever turned up. The house was left to crumble, its windows boarded up and its doors locked tight. Over time, stories began to circulate about the Whittaker house. Some said it was cursed, while others claimed it was haunted by the spirits of the missing family. Children dared each other to touch the front door, and teenagers told ghost stories about the eerie light that flickered in the attic windows late at night. The dare. In the fall of 1997, a group of teenagers looking for adventure decided to spend the night in the old house. They were skeptical of the ghost stories, but intrigued by the thrill of exploring a supposedly haunted place. Among them were Lisa, Mark, Jenna, and Dave. They equipped themselves with flashlights, a camera, and a Ouija board, convinced that they would uncover nothing more than dust and cobwebs. They entered the house just as the sun was setting. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The wooden floors creaked ominously under their weight, and the once grand staircase was now a rotting shadow of its former self. Lisa, the most adventurous of the group, led the way. They explored room after room, each one more desolate and unsettling than the last. Old, faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and shattered glass crunched beneath their feet. The house seemed frozen in time, as though the Whittakers had just stepped out for a moment and would return any second. The encounter. It was in the attic that things took a turn for the worse. The room was small and cluttered with broken furniture, old trunks, and yellowing newspapers. In the center of the room stood an old rocking chair that seemed oddly out of place. Its presence gave the room an even more eerie feeling. As they gathered around the rocking chair, Dave suggested they use the Ouija board. The group reluctantly agreed, thinking it would be a good way to end their exploration with a bit of a scare. They placed the board on a dusty old table and sat in a circle, fingers lightly touching the planchette. "Is there anyone here with us?" Jenna asked, her voice wavering slightly. The planchette began to move slowly. It spelled out a single word: help. The room fell silent. Lisa, trying to maintain her bravado, asked another question, but the planchette remained still. Dave, sensing the unease, suggested they leave. But as they stood up, the temperature in the room dropped drastically. Their breath became visible, and the air was filled with an almost palpable sense of dread. Suddenly, the old rocking chair began to move by itself, creaking back and forth as if someone were sitting in it. Jenna screamed, and the group stumbled backward, their flashlights flickering erratically. The room seemed to close in around them, and an inexplicable feeling of despair filled the air. The apparition. As they tried to flee, Lisa glanced back at the rocking chair and saw a figure sitting in it, a shadowy silhouette of a man with hollow eyes. The figure stared at her with an expression of profound sadness. The sight was so disturbing that Lisa could barely comprehend it. The group bolted down the stairs, their hearts racing. As they reached the front door, they heard a child's voice crying out for help. It was a haunting, sorrowful cry that seemed to echo through the empty halls. They burst out of the house and ran into the night, not stopping until they reached the safety of the streetlights. Aftermath. The experience left the group shaken and deeply disturbed. They reported their encounter to the local authorities, but no explanation could be found. The house remained abandoned, and the stories about the Whittaker family grew even more ominous. Years later, the house was demolished to make way for new development. During the demolition, workers found a hidden room in the basement, bricked up and covered in dust. Inside were the remains of the Whittaker family's belongings, untouched and preserved, as if waiting for someone to find them. The true story of the Whittaker family remained a mystery. Some say their spirits were trapped in the house, bound by a tragic fate they couldn't escape. Others believe the house itself was cursed, holding on to the sorrow of a family lost to time. Whatever the truth, the house on Maple Street left an indelible mark on those who dared to enter its haunted halls. And though the house is gone, the stories and the fear it inspired live on, reminding those who hear it that some mysteries are best left unsolved. The Midnight Library. Introduction. In a sleepy, picturesque town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there was a small, unassuming library known to locals as the Midnight Library. It wasn't the library's official name, but it was a moniker that stuck over the years due to an unsettling legend. The library, with its quaint brick facade and ivy-covered walls, had been in operation since the early 1900s, and while it was a beloved community fixture by day, its nighttime reputation was far more sinister. The legend. According to local lore, the Midnight Library had always been a place of secrets. The tale began in the 1920s when the library's head librarian, a mysterious and reclusive man named Edgar Blackwood, mysteriously disappeared. Edgar was known for his vast knowledge of arcane texts and his deep, unsettling demeanor. He had been working late one night, surrounded by ancient tomes and arcane artifacts, when he vanished without a trace. The library was found in disarray, as if someone had searched frantically for something. After Edgar's disappearance, strange things began to happen. Library patrons reported seeing shadows moving among the bookshelves and hearing whispers in the dead of night. Some claimed that the library's lights flickered on and off, even though no one was there. Others spoke of seeing Edgar's ghostly figure in the library's reflection, watching with hollow eyes. The haunting begins. Fast forward to the 1980s, when the library's new head librarian, a young woman named Sarah, took up the post. Sarah was a passionate and dedicated worker, known for her love of literature and her kind heart. Despite the library's unsettling reputation, she was determined to bring new life to the old building and dispel the rumors that had plagued it for decades. One chilly November evening, Sarah stayed late to organize a special collection of rare books. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The library was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the rustle of pages and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but the unease grew stronger with each passing minute. Just as she was about to leave, she noticed a peculiar book lying on the floor in the far corner of the library. It was a dusty, leather-bound volume with no title on the spine. Curiosity got the better of her, and she picked it up. As she opened it, she was struck by the intricate illustrations and strange symbols inside. The unraveling mystery. Sarah decided to investigate the book further. She took it home and began to research its origins. To her surprise, she discovered that it was a book on ancient rites and occult practices, something that piqued her interest and unease in equal measure. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself drawn deeper into the book's mysteries. She began to experience vivid dreams of the library, dreams in which she wandered through endless corridors lined with ancient books, guided by a shadowy figure who spoke in hushed tones. The figure seemed to be leading her toward a hidden room. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah returned to the library and searched for the hidden room from her dreams. She combed through every inch of the building, but her efforts were in vain. Then, one night, as she was about to give up, she noticed something unusual, a loose brick in the wall of the library's basement. With a growing sense of dread and anticipation, Sarah pried open the brick and revealed a small hidden chamber. Inside was an old desk, covered in dust and cobwebs. On the desk lay an assortment of peculiar objects, candles, strange symbols etched into parchment, and an old journal. The journal belonged to Edgar Blackwood. As Sarah read its pages, she discovered a disturbing account of Edgar's experiments with dark rituals and forbidden knowledge. The journal detailed how Edgar had become obsessed with finding a way to transcend the mortal realm and gain eternal knowledge. The last entry was particularly chilling. It spoke of a ritual to open a gateway to another world, and it ended abruptly with a chilling line: "The gateway is open. I must prepare for what comes next." The confrontation. Sarah's discovery left her shaken. She realized that Edgar's disappearance and the strange occurrences in the library were connected to the ritual described in the journal. She decided to confront the haunting presence that seemed to linger in the library, hoping to put an end to the disturbances. On a moonlit night, Sarah returned to the library armed with the journal and the peculiar artifacts she had found. She performed a cleansing ritual she had learned from her research, hoping to close the gateway Edgar had opened. As she recited the ancient incantations, the library seemed to come alive with a sinister energy. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, and a chilling wind swept through the library. Shadows danced on the walls, and Sarah felt an overwhelming presence closing in on her. The shadowy figure from her dreams materialized before her, its eyes hollow and its form indistinct. With trembling hands, Sarah completed the ritual. The library fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift. The shadowy figure let out a mournful wail before fading into nothingness. The library returned to its former state, but the air was lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Aftermath. In the years that followed, the Midnight Library was known for its peaceful and welcoming atmosphere. The strange occurrences and ghostly sightings ceased, and the library became a cherished place of learning and community once more. Sarah continued to work at the library, her experience leaving her with a profound respect for the unknown. The story of Edgar Blackwood and the Midnight Library became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of delving too deeply into forbidden knowledge and the power of facing one's fears. The Midnight Library remained a symbol of the town's history and its resilience, standing as a testament to the strength and courage required to confront the darkest of secrets and put them to rest. The Curse of Blackwood Manor. Introduction. Blackwood Manor was an imposing estate perched atop a hill overlooking the small town of Ravenswood. With its Gothic architecture, overgrown gardens, and weathered stone walls, the manor had long been the subject of local legends. The grandeur of its past was overshadowed by a dark and sinister history that had made it one of the most feared and whispered about places in the region. The Curse. The story of Blackwood Manor began in the 19th century with its original owner, Jonathan Blackwood, a wealthy and enigmatic gentleman known for his reclusive nature. Jonathan was rumored to be involved in occult practices, and his obsession with alchemy and dark rituals led to strange occurrences around the estate. Neighbors reported seeing strange lights flickering in the manor's windows at odd hours, and some even claimed to hear haunting chants emanating from the property. The most chilling tale was that of Jonathan's tragic demise. One fateful night, a massive storm rolled through Ravenswood. Lightning illuminated the manor, revealing a figure standing in the window of the top floor, seemingly performing some sort of ritual. By morning, the manor was found in disarray, with Jonathan's lifeless body discovered in the library, surrounded by arcane symbols and shattered artifacts. There was no clear cause of death, and rumors spread that Jonathan had unleashed a curse upon himself and his estate. After Jonathan's death, Blackwood Manor fell into disrepair. Locals spoke of a curse that plagued anyone who dared to live there or even visit. The once grand estate was said to be haunted by Jonathan's restless spirit and the vengeful entities he had invoked. The new residence. In the early 2000s, Blackwood Manor was purchased by the Sinclair family, who saw potential in restoring the estate to its former glory. Emily Sinclair, a historian with a passion for restoring historical properties, was particularly excited about the challenge. Her husband, David, and their two teenage children, Lily and Max, were also eager to embrace their new life in the grand but decrepit manor. From the moment they moved in, the Sinclairs felt an unsettling presence. At first, it was small things: a cold draft in certain rooms, objects moving slightly out of place, and strange noises in the dead of night. Emily attributed these occurrences to the manor's age and the process of settling into a new home. As the weeks passed, however, the disturbances grew more intense. Lily began having recurring nightmares of shadowy figures and an oppressive force that seemed to haunt her. Max, who had always been a skeptic, became increasingly uneasy as he witnessed inexplicable phenomena, lights flickering, doors slamming shut, and an inexplicable coldness in certain rooms. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner in the grand dining hall, they were interrupted by a loud crash from the library. Rushing to investigate, they'd found that a large, ancient mirror had shattered, its pieces scattered across the floor. The mirror had been a focal point in Jonathan Blackwood's rituals, and its destruction seemed to amplify the already growing sense of dread in the manor. The investigation. Desperate to understand what was happening, Emily began researching the manor's history more deeply. She uncovered Jonathan Blackwood's dark past and his obsession with summoning entities from beyond the veil. Emily found records of ancient rituals that Jonathan had attempted, rituals designed to harness dark forces and defy natural laws. One particular ritual, described in Jonathan's own writings, involved summoning a powerful spirit to gain knowledge and power. The ritual was said to have gone horribly wrong, leading to Jonathan's death and the subsequent curse on the manor. Emily realized that the disturbances in the manor were likely the result of these failed rituals and the lingering malevolent forces. Emily enlisted the help of a local paranormal investigator, a man named Arthur Graves, who specialized in dealing with haunted properties and curses. Arthur arrived with his equipment and began a thorough investigation of the manor. Arthur's findings were alarming. His instruments detected high levels of electromagnetic activity and strange fluctuations in the manor's energy fields. He also picked up residual energy from the rituals performed by Jonathan, which seemed to be interacting with the living environment. Arthur believed that the manor was a focal point for malevolent entities that had been unleashed by Jonathan's experiments. The confrontation. Arthur, along with the Sinclair family, decided to perform a cleansing ritual to expel the malevolent entities and lift the curse that plagued Blackwood Manor. They gathered in the library, the epicenter of the disturbances, and prepared for the ritual. As they began the incantations and the protective barriers, the manor seemed to come alive with a chaotic energy. Shadows moved across the walls, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the rooms, mocking their efforts. The temperature plummeted, and the oppressive presence intensified. During the ritual, Emily felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder and a chilling whisper in her ear, "You cannot undo what has been done." The entities were resisting their efforts, trying to maintain their hold on the manor. Arthur's expertise was crucial in navigating the ritual, and with Emily's courage and determination, they continued to push through the malevolent resistance. After hours of intense and exhausting work, they'd finally completed the cleansing ritual. The energy in the manor shifted, and the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. Aftermath. In the days following the ritual, Blackwood Manor felt different. The sense of dread that had hung over the estate dissipated, and the disturbances ceased. The Sinclair family, while still haunted by their experiences, felt a renewed sense of peace and hope for their future in the manor. The curse of Blackwood Manor was broken, but the Sinclairs knew that the estate's dark history would always be a part of its legacy. They chose to preserve the manor's history and ensure that the lessons learned from Jonathan Blackwood's obsession with dark forces were not forgotten. Blackwood Manor remained a symbol of both the allure and danger of delving into the unknown. The Whispering Cabin in the Woods. Introduction. Deep within the dense, untamed forest of Pine Hollow, hidden away from the beaten path, stood a small weathered cabin. Known to locals as the Whispering Cabin, it had long been a source of eerie stories and unsettling rumors. The cabin was isolated, its only neighbors being towering pine trees and the occasional curious wildlife. The legend of the Whispering Cabin was one that instilled fear and intrigue in equal measure. The legend. The Whispering Cabin's legend began in the early 1900s with a man named Samuel Gray. Samuel was a reclusive figure, a hunter and trapper who lived alone in the forest. He was known for his solitary lifestyle and his unusual habit of talking to himself as he worked. Locals would occasionally hear strange murmurs drifting from the cabin, which they attributed to Samuel's eccentric behavior. One winter's night, Samuel disappeared without a trace. His cabin was found in disarray, with overturned furniture and a hearth that had gone cold. Searches of the surrounding woods yielded no sign of Samuel, and rumors began to circulate about the cabin being cursed. Some claimed that Samuel had summoned something dark and malevolent that took him away. The most unsettling aspect of the legend was the eerie whispers that could occasionally be heard emanating from the cabin, even when it was abandoned. These whispers were said to be the voices of lost souls or the result of dark rituals gone awry. The modern discovery. In the fall of 2015, a group of college friends, Ethan, Claire, Mark, and Jenna, decided to explore the Whispering Cabin as part of a weekend camping trip. The group had heard the legends and was excited by the prospect of experiencing something supernatural. They were skeptics but also thrill-seekers, eager to test the stories and see if there was any truth behind the eerie tales. They arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon, and despite its dilapidated state, they were fascinated by its atmosphere. The wooden structure was covered in moss, and its windows were dark and opaque, giving it a foreboding presence. The friends set up their camp nearby and prepared to explore the cabin. As the sun began to set, the cabin took on a more sinister appearance. The once intriguing location now seemed ominous and oppressive. The group hesitated but eventually decided to enter the cabin. They carefully pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The strange occurrences. The interior of the cabin was exactly as they had imagined, dusty, cluttered with old, broken furniture, and filled with a musty smell. They began to explore the rooms, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they moved through the cabin, they noticed something odd. A collection of old journals and scattered pages strewn across a table in the main room. Ethan, ever the curious one, picked up a journal and began to flip through its pages. The journal belonged to Samuel Gray and was filled with strange, disjointed writings and drawings. The entries described Samuel's growing obsession with the forest and its whispering voices, which he believed were spirits seeking to communicate with him. The further Samuel went into his writings, the more frantic and incoherent they became, culminating in a disturbing final entry. "They are coming for me. The voices are getting louder. I must be ready." As they read through the journal, the atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier. The friends began to hear faint whispers, almost like a conversation happening just out of earshot. The whispers seemed to grow louder and more distinct as the night went on. At first, they dismissed it as the wind, but the sounds persisted, and a feeling of dread began to settle over them. The haunting. Late into the night, the whispers turned into full-blown murmurs. The friends felt an oppressive presence in the cabin, as if they were being watched. Claire, who was sensitive to such things, felt a cold hand brush against her arm and heard a voice clearly saying her name. She screamed, startling the others. Mark and Jenna, trying to calm Claire, noticed that the temperature in the cabin had dropped significantly. Their breaths were visible and the air felt heavy. The whispers continued, now interspersed with what sounded like sobbing and pleading voices. Ethan, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, decided to explore the cabin further. He found a hidden trapdoor beneath a rug in the main room. With some effort, he pried it open, revealing a small, hidden basement. The basement was filled with old, dusty crates and a small, grim altar in the center. The altar was adorned with strange symbols and remnants of rituals. As Ethan examined the altar, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The whispers grew louder, turning into anguished screams. The friends, now terrified, decided it was time to leave. They scrambled out of the cabin, their flashlights flickering wildly as they hurried back to their campsite. The escape. Once outside, the friends quickly packed up their things and left the area. The whispers and sounds of anguish seemed to follow them as they made their way down the trail, their hearts racing with fear. They didn't stop until they reached their car and drove away from the whispering cabin. As they recounted their experience, they realized they had encountered something far beyond their expectations. The whispers, the oppressive atmosphere, and the disturbing discovery in the basement all pointed to a dark presence that had been trapped in the cabin for decades. Aftermath. In the weeks following their experience, the friends shared their story with local historians and paranormal investigators. The investigation revealed that Samuel Gray's disappearance and the cabin's haunted reputation were indeed linked to his obsession with summoning and communicating with entities from another realm. Samuel's writings indicated that he had made a dangerous pact with these entities, which had likely led to his fate. The whispering cabin remained abandoned, and the forest around it was avoided by locals. It became a cautionary tale of the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human understanding and the consequences of seeking to communicate with entities that should remain undisturbed. The cabin stood as a grim reminder of the thin veil between the known and the unknown, and the whispering cabin became a symbol of the perils of curiosity and the enduring power of legends that warn of the darkness lurking just beyond the edges of our understanding. The Haunting of Ashford Manor. Introduction. Ashford Manor was a sprawling estate situated on the outskirts of a small, sleepy town called Ashford. With its grand facade, meticulously landscaped gardens, and ancient oak trees, the manor was the epitome of old-world charm. However, beneath its picturesque exterior lay a history of tragedy and hauntings that had turned Ashford Manor into a place of eerie fascination and dread. The tragic history. The story of Ashford Manor began in the 1800s with its construction by the wealthy Ashford family. The manor was the pride of its owners, a symbol of their status and success. However, the family's happiness was short-lived. In the early 1900s, a series of tragic events unfolded that would forever mark the manor's history. The first tragedy struck when the Ashfords' only son, Edward, was involved in a fatal carriage accident. The family was devastated and their grief was palpable. The manor, once a lively center of social gatherings, became a somber place of mourning. The second tragedy occurred just a few months later. Elizabeth Ashford, Edward's mother, was found dead under suspicious circumstances. Although the official cause of death was ruled as an accident, rumors swirled that she had been the victim of foul play. The manor fell into disrepair as the family struggled to cope with their losses. By the 1930s, the manor had been abandoned and was slowly consumed by neglect. Local law suggested that the Ashford family's spirits were trapped within the manor, unable to move on due to the unresolved sorrow and turmoil of their deaths. The modern investigation. In the late 1990s, the manor was purchased by the Harper family, who were unaware of its dark past. Emily Harper, an ambitious interior designer, saw the manor as a promising project, a chance to restore a historic property to its former glory. Her husband Tom and their two teenage children, Sarah and Jake, were supportive of the venture, eager to transform the neglected estate into a family home. From the moment they moved in, the Harpers experienced unsettling occurrences. Strange noises, such as footsteps echoing in empty rooms and the distant sound of crying, became a common part of their lives. The children, Sarah and Jake, spoke of seeing shadowy figures and feeling watched, but Emily and Tom dismissed these experiences as the result of stress and adjustment to their new home. However, the disturbances escalated. Objects would move on their own, and the temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly. Emily, a pragmatic woman by nature, decided to investigate the history of the manor to understand what might be causing these phenomena. The discovery. Emily delved into the local archives and discovered the tragic history of the Ashford family. She found records of Edward's accident, Elizabeth's mysterious death, and the subsequent decline of the manor. The more she learned, the more she realized that the disturbances in the manor might be linked to the unresolved sorrow and tragedy of the Ashford family. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily sought the help of a local historian and paranormal investigator, Dr. Richard Lane. Dr. Lane was known for his work in researching haunted locations and was intrigued by the Harper family's experiences. Dr. Lane conducted a thorough investigation of Ashford Manor. He used various tools, including electromagnetic field detectors and infrared cameras, to document the phenomena. During his investigation, Dr. Lane captured several anomalies: unexplained cold spots, flickering lights, and disturbing EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, that included anguished cries and pleas for help. The encounter. One evening, Dr. Lane and the Harper family conducted a séance in the manor's grand ballroom. The room, once the site of lavish parties and joyous celebrations, now felt heavy and oppressive. The séance was intended to communicate with any spirits present and to understand the nature of their unrest. As the séance began, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically and a dense fog seemed to envelop the space. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Dr. Lane, leading the séance, called out to the spirits of the Ashford family. The response was immediate. A cold, unsettling breeze swept through the room, and the whispers of multiple voices filled the air. The voices spoke of loss, betrayal, and sorrow, and among them, one stood out, a woman's voice crying for justice and release. Sarah, Emily's daughter, suddenly went into a trance and began speaking in a voice not her own. She relayed a message from the spirit of Elizabeth Ashford, who expressed her anguish and frustration at being unable to move on. Elizabeth spoke of a betrayal by someone close to her, which she believed led to her untimely death. The resolution. The information revealed during the seance was both chilling and enlightening. Dr. Lane suggested that to help the spirits find peace, the Harpers needed to address the unresolved issues surrounding Elizabeth's death. Emily and Tom took this advice to heart and began researching further into Elizabeth's life and her relationships. Their investigation led them to uncover a hidden journal belonging to Elizabeth. The journal revealed that Elizabeth had been involved in a tumultuous relationship with a trusted family friend who had become increasingly jealous and unstable. The journal hinted that this friend might have been involved in Elizabeth's death. Emily and Tom shared their findings with local authorities, who reopened the investigation into Elizabeth's death. The renewed scrutiny led to the discovery of evidence that pointed to the family friend's involvement in Elizabeth's death. Although the friend had passed away years earlier, the revelation brought a sense of closure to the Ashford family's tragic story. Aftermath. With the unresolved issues addressed, the disturbances in Ashford Manor gradually ceased. The atmosphere in the manor lightened, and the oppressive feelings that had plagued the Harpers began to lift. The manor, once a place of sorrow and unrest, was transformed into a beloved family home. The story of Ashford Manor became a local legend, a tale of how understanding and compassion could help heal the wounds of the past. The manor stood as a testament to the power of uncovering and confronting hidden truths and the importance of resolving unresolved grief. The Phantom of Ravensbrook Hotel. Introduction. Ravensbrook Hotel was an elegant and historic establishment situated in a picturesque town known for its Victorian charm. The hotel had been a popular destination for travelers seeking luxury and comfort, with its grand architecture, opulent furnishings, and serene gardens. However, beneath its facade of refinement lay a chilling history that had given rise to unsettling legends and paranormal occurrences. The mysterious past. Ravensbrook Hotel was built in the late 19th century by the wealthy Ravenscroft family. The hotel's grand opening was a lavish affair, attended by dignitaries and socialites from far and wide. It quickly became known for its exceptional service and luxurious accommodations. However, the hotel's success was marred by a series of tragic events. In the early 1900s, a series of mysterious disappearances occurred at the hotel. Guests and staff members vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their belongings. The disappearances were never fully explained, and the hotel began to develop a reputation for being cursed. Rumors spread that the hotel was haunted by the spirits of those who had vanished. The most notorious of these events was the disappearance of Lady Eleanor Ravenscroft, the wife of the hotel's founder. Lady Eleanor was known for her grace and beauty, and her sudden disappearance during a grand ball left the community in shock. Despite extensive searches and investigations, Lady Eleanor was never found, and her disappearance was never solved. The modern era. Fast forward to the present day, and Ravensbrook Hotel was still in operation, now under the management of the Blake family. The current owner, Rebecca Blake, was determined to uphold the hotel's legacy and restore its former glory. Despite the hotel's storied past, Rebecca had always been a skeptic of the supernatural and dismissed the ghostly rumors as mere folklore. One autumn evening, the hotel hosted a prestigious gala to celebrate its centennial anniversary. The event attracted high-profile guests and media attention, and the atmosphere was one of excitement and celebration. The hotel was abuzz with activity as staff prepared for the grand occasion. As the evening progressed, Rebecca began to notice strange occurrences. She heard whispers and footsteps echoing through the empty hallways, and the temperature in certain rooms seemed to drop unexpectedly. At first, she dismissed these incidents as the result of the hotel's age and the stress of hosting such a large event. The haunting unfolds. As the gala continued, the disturbances became more pronounced. Guests reported feeling an oppressive presence and hearing strange noises coming from the ballroom. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving through the corridors. The hotel staff, already on edge, struggled to maintain their composure as the unsettling events unfolded. Rebecca decided to investigate the source of these disturbances. She consulted with historians and paranormal experts who had previously investigated Ravensbrück Hotel. They revealed that Lady Eleanor Ravenscroft's disappearance was linked to a series of dark rituals and secret societies associated with the Ravenscroft family. According to local legend, Lady Eleanor had discovered something forbidden and had been silenced to protect the family's secrets. Intrigued and disturbed, Rebecca decided to delve deeper into the hotel's history. She discovered a hidden archive of old letters, diaries, and photographs related to the Ravenscroft family. Among these documents was a journal belonging to Lady Eleanor. The journal contained cryptic entries about forbidden knowledge, secret meetings, and a mysterious figure known only as the Phantom. The Phantom revealed. The journal revealed that Lady Eleanor had been involved in an occult society that practiced dark rituals in the hotel's hidden chambers. She had discovered that the society intended to summon a powerful entity from another realm, and she had planned to expose their plans. The journal's final entries hinted at a confrontation with the society's leader, who was referred to as the Phantom. Determined to uncover the truth, Rebecca and a team of paranormal investigators conducted a thorough search of the hotel's hidden areas. They discovered a concealed passage leading to a secret chamber beneath the hotel. The chamber contained remnants of the occult rituals described in Lady Eleanor's journal, including symbols, candles, and strange artifacts. As they explored the chamber, the investigators experienced a surge of paranormal activity. The temperature dropped, and an overwhelming sense of dread filled the air. The investigators captured evidence of ghostly apparitions and eerie noises on their equipment. The Phantom, the entity mentioned in Lady Eleanor's journal, seemed to be active and malevolent. The confrontation. Rebecca, with the help of the investigators, decided to perform a cleansing ritual to banish the malevolent presence and put the restless spirits to rest. The ritual involved reciting ancient incantations and using protective symbols to create a barrier against the supernatural entities. As the ritual progressed, the atmosphere in the chamber grew tense. Shadows danced on the walls, and the oppressive presence of the Phantom grew stronger. The investigators' equipment went haywire, and the room was filled with a cacophony of ghostly voices and sounds. Rebecca and the investigators pressed on, their determination unwavering. The ritual reached its climax as they invoked a powerful protective spell to seal the chamber and banish the Phantom. The air seemed to crackle with energy as the ritual reached its peak, and a blinding light filled the chamber. When the light subsided, the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. The temperature returned to normal, and the unsettling noises ceased. The investigators' equipment showed no further signs of paranormal activity. The Phantom, it seemed, had been banished, and the restless spirits were finally at peace. Aftermath. Following the cleansing ritual, Ravensbrück Hotel experienced a dramatic shift. The disturbances ceased, and the hotel's atmosphere lightened. Guests and staff reported a renewed sense of calm and tranquility. Rebecca Blake continued to manage the hotel, and the centennial anniversary gala became a symbol of the hotel's resilience and the overcoming of its dark past. The story of Ravensbrück Hotel became a tale of redemption and resolution. The hotel, once known for its haunting reputation, was now celebrated for its history and the courage of those who had faced its dark legacy. The Phantom of Ravensbrück Hotel remained a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of delving into forbidden knowledge and the importance of confronting the shadows of the past. The hotel continued to welcome guests from near and far, its elegant halls and grand architecture standing as a testament to the enduring strength of those who dared to face the unknown and bring light to the darkest corners of history.